The amphitheater buzzed with voices as cadets filed into their seats. The room curved downward toward a massive holographic projector at the center, and tiered seating rose up on all sides like an ancient arena. Sunlight from Axios Prime streamed through the transparent dome overhead, painting everything in soft amber tones. Jiho took his usual seat in the back row. He preferred it there, away from the eager students who always sat up front competing for the instructor's attention. He set his datapad on the desk and waited quietly while the others settled in. His bunkmate Taewon dropped into the seat beside him, breathing hard. "Almost late again," the amphibious cadet said, his skin still glistening from his morning swim. "You should have woken me up." "I tried." "3 times," Taewon grinned, showing rows of tiny teeth. "Fair enough." Down near the front, Hyejin was already reviewing notes on her datapad, her antennae twitching with concentration. She was Arunai, insectoid and brilliant, and she made sure everyone knew it. Her compound eyes missed nothing, and her academic record was flawless. Instructor Velthar entered through the main doorway, his scales catching the light. The Kryn veteran moved with the careful precision of someone who had seen real combat. Decorations lined his uniform, each one representing a battle or campaign. The room fell silent immediately. "Good morning, cadets." His voice was a low rasp that carried perfectly through the space. "Today we begin our study of pivotal naval engagements. We will analyze tactics, decision-making under pressure, and the qualities that separate adequate officers from legendary ones." He activated the projector. The lights dimmed, and suddenly the center of the room exploded with color. A 3-dimensional star map appeared, showing a region of space dominated by swirling red clouds. The Crimson Nebula. 15 years ago, Velthar continued, this region of space became a graveyard. The Devourers, a machine collective determined to eliminate all organic life, launched a coordinated assault on 3 colony worlds. 2 million civilians needed evacuation. The nearest fleet was 6 days away. Jiho's hands tightened on the edge of his desk. The display zoomed in, showing dozens of transport ships fleeing toward a jump point. Behind them, dark geometric shapes pursued like predators. The Devourer vessels were all angles and edges, their hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. One ship stood between the civilians and annihilation. Velthar said, "A human frigate." "The Indomitable." A murmur ran through the class. Several cadets leaned forward. Everyone had heard stories about human vessels, about their tendency to fight against impossible odds. The hologram shifted, highlighting a single ship. It was smaller than the Devourer vessels, more compact and angular. Human designs always looked aggressive even when stationary. This one bore scorch marks and damage even before the battle began. The Indomitable was already damaged from a previous engagement, the instructor explained. Crew of 200, facing a battle group of 15 Devourer warships, each one larger and more heavily armed. "Suicide," someone whispered. The captain was ordered to retreat. Velthar continued. Instead, he positioned his ship directly in the enemy's path and opened fire. The simulation began to play. The Indomitable moved forward, its weapons blazing. The Devourer ships returned fire immediately, their beams cutting through space. The human frigate twisted and dove, evading some shots, taking others on reinforced sections of hull. "For 6 hours," Velthar said quietly. "This single ship held the line." Hyejin's voice cut through the darkness. "Instructor, the data must be exaggerated. No ship could survive that kind of sustained assault. The structural integrity alone would fail within minutes." "The records have been verified by 3 independent sources," Velthar replied, "including recovered Devourer combat logs." The battle continued on the display. The Indomitable was taking damage, pieces of its hull breaking away, but it kept moving, kept firing. It used the nebula itself as cover, disappearing into the dense gas clouds and emerging from unexpected angles. Taewon nudged Jiho. "Your people are crazy," he said. But there was admiration in his voice. Jiho said nothing. His eyes were locked on the display, his face expressionless. The simulation showed the transport ships reaching the jump point, their drives activating in sequence. One by one, they vanished into faster-than-light travel. Safe. The last transport jumped away, and the display timestamp showed 5 hours and 47 minutes had elapsed. The Indomitable had accomplished its mission, Velthar said, but by this point the ship was critically damaged. Weapons failing, life support compromised. The captain had one choice remaining. The hologram zoomed in on the frigate. It was barely recognizable now. Chunks of armor gone, atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. But its engine still burned. He dove deeper into the nebula's core, the instructor said, into a region where the magnetic fields would scramble all sensors. The Devourers followed. The display showed the human ship plunging into swirling red chaos. The enemy vessels pursued, their formation spreading out to search. Then the Indomitable emerged from the clouds at full speed, aimed directly at the largest Devourer command ship. The impact was silent in the vacuum of space, but the cadets could imagine the sound. The Indomitable struck the command carrier amidships, and for a moment nothing happened. Then both ships exploded in a brilliant flash of light that washed out the display. When the brightness faded, only debris remained. The remaining Devourer ships, their command structure destroyed and their target escaped, retreated from the system. The lights came back up slowly. The room was silent. 200 crew members, Velthar said, 17 survivors, recovered from escape pods scattered across the nebula. The captain and first officer did not survive. Neither did most of the bridge crew or engineering staff. He paused, his reptilian eyes scanning the room. This battle changed the course of the war. It proved that the Devourers could be stopped. It bought time for the Alliance to regroup and mount a counteroffensive. It saved 2 million lives. He gestured at the frozen hologram. Today we will analyze how. Hyejin spoke up again. With respect, instructor, this seems more like a case study in luck than tactics. The humans gambled and won, did they? Velthar tilted his head. Or did they understand something about warfare that you have yet to learn? Jiho stood abruptly. His chair scraped against the floor loud in the quiet room. Every eye turned toward him. Taewon looked up in surprise. Cadet? Velthar asked. Do you have a question? Jiho's voice was quiet but steady. May I be excused, sir? I'm not feeling well. The instructor studied him for a long moment. No, Cadet, please remain seated. This lesson concerns you particularly. Jiho slowly sank back into his chair. His hands were shaking now, and he pressed them flat against the desk to hide it. Taewon leaned closer. You okay? He whispered. Jiho didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the frozen hologram, on the image of a ship that had died 15 years ago. On a ship he remembered all too well. Instructor Velthar moved to his console and typed several commands. We have recovered footage from the battle, he said. Multiple sources. Devourer wrecks, Allied surveillance drones, even some internal recordings from the Indomitable itself that were transmitted before the ship's destruction. The lights dimmed again. This time, when the hologram activated, it wasn't a clean tactical display. It was raw combat footage, grainy and shaking. The first clip came from a Devourer ship's external sensors. It showed the Indomitable from half a kilometer away, racing through the red clouds of the nebula. The human frigate was already damaged, trailing atmosphere and debris. But its movements were precise, almost graceful. It rolled suddenly, and a plasma beam that should have struck its reactor instead carved through empty space. Note the reaction time, Velthar said. The pilot compensated for the attack before the beam was even fired. They predicted the Devourer targeting solution. Lucky guess, Hyejin muttered, but she was leaning forward now, watching intently. The next clip came from inside the Indomitable's bridge. The image was dark, lit only by emergency lighting and the glow of console displays. Smoke drifted through the air. Somewhere in the background, an alarm was screaming. A human sat in the captain's chair, face covered in soot and sweat. His voice came through clearly despite the chaos around him. Helm, come about to bearing 270. Weapons, prepare torpedo spread pattern Delta. We have one shot at this. The camera shook as the ship took another hit. Sparks showered from an overhead panel, but the crew didn't flinch. They worked their stations with steady hands. Firing, someone said. The view switched to external cameras. 3 torpedoes streaked away from the Indomitable, curving through the nebula's magnetic fields. They struck a Devourer cruiser in perfect sequence, each one hitting a different section of the enemy's hull. The cruiser broke apart. Back on the bridge, the captain was already calling out the next order. Engineering, I need more power to the forward shields. I don't care where it comes from. A woman's voice responded over the intercom, calm and professional. Diverting from life support, Captain. You'll have 5 minutes before air quality becomes critical. Make it 3 minutes and give me more power. Understood, sir. The footage continued, showing clip after clip of the battle. Each one revealed new details. The crew's coordination was perfect. When one console failed, another crew member immediately took over its functions. When a bulkhead began to fail, 3 people were already moving to reinforce it before the warning even sounded. Jiho watched in silence. His jaw was clenched so tightly that his teeth hurt. Another clip played. This one was audio only, recorded from the engineering deck. Multiple voices spoke over each other, coordinating damage control. Then a younger voice cut through, high and breathless. Coolant leak in Section 7. I can reach the valve, but I need someone to cycle the emergency release on my mark. Too dangerous, an older voice replied. Radiation levels are critical in that section. We don't have a choice. If that leak reaches the reactor core, we're all dead anyway. There was a pause. Then go, be fast, the sound of running footsteps. Heavy breathing. The hiss of a hatch opening. Then a scream quickly cut off, a thud. More footsteps dragging something. Someone was crying. Got him out. He's burned but alive. Valve is sealed. Velthar stopped the playback. That crew member was 13 years old, he said quietly. Falsified identification to enlist. The captain discovered the deception, but kept him on board as an engineering apprentice. The boy's small size made him invaluable for accessing maintenance tunnels that adults couldn't reach. Several cadets turned to look at each other, shocked. 13? Taewon whispered. That's illegal in every system. War makes us compromise our ideals, Velthar said. The captain's report noted that the boy had been living on the streets after his colony was destroyed by a devourer attack. He wanted to fight. The captain gave him that chance. More footage played. A view of the Indomitable's galley, somehow still functioning despite everything. An alien chef moved between stations, preparing meals with steady hands. The timestamp showed this was 4 hours into the battle. That's Kess, Velthar explained. A Vrellan chef who insisted on maintaining meal schedules. He believed routine would keep morale stable. He continued cooking until his section depressurized. He didn't survive. The display shifted to show the ship's main corridor. A human in marine armor stood at an intersection, checking his weapon. He started singing, his voice surprisingly pleasant despite the circumstances. An old Earth song, slow and sad. Sergeant Minho, the instructor said. He sang throughout the worst parts of the battle. Other crew members later said it helped them stay calm. He was killed when a Devourer boarding drone breached the hull near his position. He destroyed it but took fatal wounds in the process. Yejin's antennae had stopped twitching. Her compound eyes were fixed on the display and her mandibles were very still. The footage continued. A woman at a tactical console, her hands moving rapidly across holographic controls. The main computer was clearly offline, but she was using a datapad calculating firing solutions manually. Her fingers danced across the screen, numbers appearing and disappearing faster than most people could read. First Officer Soman, Velthar said, mathematics prodigy. When the targeting computer failed, she continued calculating trajectories by hand. Every shot fired in the last 2 hours of the battle was aimed using her calculations. Perfect accuracy. The final clip began to play. The bridge again, but worse now. Half the stations were dark. The captain was still in his chair, but blood stained his uniform. The ship was shaking constantly from impacts. All transports away, sir, someone reported. The captain nodded slowly. Then we've done our job. He touched a control on his chair's arm. All hands, this is the captain. You have fought with courage and honor. You have saved 2 million lives today. Whatever happens next, remember that. Remember what we accomplished together. He closed the channel and looked at his first officer. Somin, one last calculation. Plot a ramming course, sir. We're not making it out of here. Neither are they. Plot the course. The woman hesitated for only a moment. Then her hands moved across her datapad. Course plotted, Captain. Recommend you evacuate non-essential personnel to escape pods. Do it. Anyone who can reach a pod has 2 minutes. He opened the ship-wide channel again. Abandon ship. All personnel to escape pods. That's an order. The footage showed crew members running through corridors helping the wounded, dragging anyone who couldn't move on their own. The ship lurched violently. Someone screamed. The camera went dark. When it came back, the view was external again from a distant surveillance drone. The Indomitable, barely holding together, was accelerating toward the Devourer command carrier. Small pods were ejecting from its hull, tumbling away into the nebula. The 2 ships came together. The explosion lit up the entire nebula. Velthar ended the recording. The lights came up. The room was absolutely silent. Several cadets were crying. Taewon's skin had gone pale blue, a sign of distress in his species. Jiho's face was wet with tears, but he made no sound. His hands gripped the desk's edge hard enough that his knuckles were white. Yejin spoke, and her voice was different now, quieter. "I was wrong," she said. "This wasn't luck. This was skill and sacrifice. I apologize for my earlier dismissal." Velthar nodded. "Understanding the difference between theory and reality is an important lesson, Cadet. You are learning." He turned to address the full class. 17 survivors, scattered across various postings after their recovery. Few spoke publicly about what they experienced. The psychological trauma was severe. Most required years of therapy. All were offered medical discharge, but every single one chose to remain in service. The instructor's eyes moved across the rows of cadets, finally settling on the back row. "One of those survivors is in this room right now." Every head in the amphitheater turned. Cadets looked at each other, then around the room, trying to identify who the instructor meant. Confused whispers filled the space. Jiho remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Taewon's eyes widened. He looked at his bunkmate, really looked at him, seeing details he'd never thought to question before. The scars on Jiho's forearms that were always covered by sleeves. The nightmares that sometimes woke both of them in the middle of the night. The way Jiho never talked about his past, always deflecting questions with vague answers. "Jiho?" Taewon whispered. The human didn't respond. He slowly pushed himself to his feet, his movements mechanical. The room went silent again, all eyes on him now. "I was there," Jiho said. His voice was quiet but clear in the sudden stillness. "I was on the Indomitable." Hyejin stood up from her seat near the front. "That's impossible. You're barely old enough to attend the academy. You would have been a child." "I was 13, Jiho said. His hands were at his sides now, clenched into fists. "Enlisted at 12 with false documents. The captain, Commander June, discovered the truth 3 months after I came aboard. He should have sent me away, but he kept me as an engineering apprentice. Said I had good hands for tight spaces." Instructor Velthar pulled up a file on his personal display. His scaled face showed surprise, then recognition. "Section 7 Engineering. The coolant leak. That was you in the recording." Jiho nodded once. "Yes, sir. Prove it," Yejin said. Her voice wasn't hostile now, just cautious. Anyone could have studied the official reports. Jiho closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, something had changed in his expression. He wasn't a cadet anymore. He was someone else, someone older. The official reports don't mention that the captain kept a photograph of his daughter on his command console, Jiho said. She was 6 years old. He used to talk to her picture when the bridge was empty during night shift. I heard him once when I was delivering a repair report. He was telling her about a park they would visit when he got home. The room was absolutely silent. The reports don't mention that First Officer Somin hummed while she worked. Always the same tune over and over. I never learned the name of the song. She hummed it even during the final calculations. Jiho's voice remained steady, but tears ran down his face now. The reports don't mention that Sergeant Minho's favorite Earth song was about rain. He sang it 47 times during the battle. I counted. He said the melody reminded him of water falling on leaves, and it made him think of home. The reports don't mention that Chef Kess made me special meals because I was still growing. He worried I wasn't eating enough. His last meal was a soup. I never got to taste it. The section depressurized while it was still cooking. Jiho looked directly at Velthar. The reports don't mention the smell. Burning insulation smells sweet at first, almost like flowers, before it turns acrid. Plasma burns smell like lightning and copper. Blood in zero gravity doesn't puddle. It forms spheres that float. They're beautiful and horrible at the same time. The instructor's expression had shifted to something like awe. The auxiliary power conduits. When the main reactor started cascading, I was small enough to reach the manual override, Jiho confirmed. The radiation levels were lethal for an adult. For a child, I had maybe 5 minutes before permanent damage. I made it in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The burns on my arms are from touching contaminated piping without proper shielding. He held up his arms, pulling back his sleeves. The scars were extensive, twisting patterns of healed tissue that ran from his wrists to his elbows. The captain gave us 18 more minutes. That's how long it took for the last transport to reach the jump point. 18 minutes that cost 183 lives. Taewon stood up beside his friend. Why didn't you ever tell me? We've been bunkmates for 6 months. Jiho looked at him and there was something terribly sad in his eyes, because the 17 of us who survived made a promise. We wouldn't let that battle define us. We'd honor the dead by living well, by being more than just survivors of Crimson Nebula. We scattered to different posts, different assignments. We stayed in contact, but we didn't talk about it publicly. Then why now? Taewon asked. Because, Jiho said, turning to address the whole class. All of you are going to graduate and become officers. You're going to command ships and crews. You're going to make decisions that determine whether people live or die. And you need to understand that what happened on the Indomitable wasn't magic. It wasn't because humans are special or superior. He gestured at the frozen hologram, still showing debris where a ship had once been. It was 200 people who were absolutely terrified, doing what needed to be done anyway. The captain was scared. Soman was scared. Minho sang because he was trying not to scream. Kes cooked, because routine was the only thing keeping him from panic. We were all falling apart inside, but we kept functioning because we didn't have a choice. Jiho walked down the steps toward the hologram, his classmates watching in silence. He reached out and touched the light-form debris field. Captain June recorded personal messages for every survivor before the end. Mine was 17 seconds long. I've watched it maybe 1,000 times. He said, "You have good hands, kid. Use them to build instead of destroy. Live well." That's an order. He turned back to face the class. So I came to the academy. I studied hard. I kept my head down. I tried to be normal. But you all needed to know the truth. Those tactics you were analyzing, half of them were accidents, mistakes we turned into advantages. The death dive into the nebula's core, that was my fault. I rerouted power wrong and caused a navigation error. The captain just had the brilliance to make it look intentional. Hyejin had moved closer, her antennae focused entirely on Jiho. The ramming attack? The ship was already falling apart, Jiho said. The captain knew we weren't going to make it out, so he chose to make our deaths count for something. He evacuated everyone he could, then aimed us at their command ship. It wasn't a tactical masterstroke. It was a dying ship making one last meaningful act. Instructor Velthar descended from his position at the teaching console. He approached Jiho and placed a clawed hand on the young human's shoulder. "Cadet, thank you for your testimony. This is more valuable than any tactical analysis." The instructor's voice was gentle. "However, I disagree with one thing you said, sir. You said humans aren't special, but the ability to function through terror, to remain professional when death is certain, to sacrifice yourself for others even when every instinct screams to save yourself. That is extraordinary. Perhaps not unique to humans, but extraordinary nonetheless." Velthar looked around at the silent class. "Let this be your lesson today. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite fear. Leadership is not knowing all the answers. It is making the best decision you can with incomplete information and living with the consequences." He turned back to Jiho. "You were 13 years old and you went into a radioactive compartment knowing you might die. You did it anyway. That is the kind of officer this academy aims to produce." Jiho shook his head. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Hyejin said quietly. She had reached the hologram now, standing across from Jiho with the light of the destroyed ships between them. "Most people would have frozen. Most people would have run. You chose to act. That's the difference." Around the room, other cadets were nodding. Some were still crying. Others looked thoughtful, processing everything they'd learned. Taewon came down the steps to stand beside Jiho. "You have nightmares 3 times a week. You wake up saying names. I never asked because I thought you'd tell me when you were ready. I dream about the ones who didn't make it to the pods," Jiho said softly. "I hear them calling for help in sections that are already depressurized. I know it's not real. They died instantly, but my brain keeps showing me alternative versions where they suffered." "Does it get better?" Taewon asked. "It got quieter. The nightmares used to be every night. Now it's just a few times a week. My therapist says that's progress." Velthar addressed the class again. "I'm ending today's lesson here. Cadet Jiho has given you much to think about. Tomorrow we will continue with technical analysis, but today was about understanding the human element of warfare." Dismissed. The cadets filed out slowly, many glancing at Jiho as they passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked like they wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. Jiho stood by the hologram watching them go, feeling simultaneously exposed and relieved. The secret was out. After 5 years of carrying it alone, everyone finally knew. The amphitheater had emptied except for 3 people. Jiho stood by the hologram projector, his hand still resting on the console. Taewon waited nearby, uncertain whether to stay or give his friend privacy. Instructor Velthar was gathering his materials but moving slowly, clearly in no hurry to leave. "Sir," Jiho said quietly, "may I show them what the recordings didn't capture?" Velthar paused. "Are you certain? You've already shared more than I expected." "They need to understand. The legend makes it look clean, heroic, but it wasn't. It was messy and terrible and full of mistakes." Jiho looked at the frozen debris field. If they're going to learn from it, they need to see the whole truth. The instructor nodded slowly. "I'll recall the class. But Cadet, you can stop at any time. You owe them nothing." "I owe the 183 everything," Jiho replied. 20 minutes later, the cadets had returned, confusion and curiosity on their faces. They took their seats quietly and the room fell into expectant silence. Hijin sat in the front row now, her compound eyes fixed on Jiho. The human cadet stood before them looking younger than his 19 years. He took a deep breath and began to speak. "The battle started at 0600 ship time. I'd been awake for 4 hours already, running diagnostics on the secondary power grid. We knew the Devourers were coming. We'd received the warning 6 hours earlier. Most of the crew hadn't slept." Jiho touched the console and the hologram shifted, showing a schematic of the Indomitable's interior. "When the first shots hit, I was in corridor C7, carrying a toolkit to my next assignment. The ship lurched and I hit the wall hard enough to crack a rib. I didn't realize it was broken until 3 hours later. The adrenaline kept me functional." He highlighted a section of the ship, the galley. "Chef Kess started making breakfast at 0500, same as every day. When the battle started, he didn't stop. He made enough food for the entire crew, even though half of us were too busy to eat. He believed in routine, in normalcy. He was terrified of the Devourers. They'd killed his family on his homeworld, but he kept cooking." The hologram showed a different section, the Marine barracks. Sergeant Minho gathered his squad and positioned them at key intersections in case of boarding. He sang to keep them calm, but his hands shook when he loaded his weapon. "I saw him take a medication before heading to his post. Anxiety suppressants. He needed them to function in combat." Jiho's voice remained steady, but his eyes were distant, seeing something the others couldn't. At 0700, 2 hours into the fight, the main computer suffered a critical failure. First Officer Samin took over manual calculations, but she wasn't just brilliant. She was also crying while she worked, silent tears running down her face while her hands flew across the datapad. She'd lost her husband at Crimson Reach 6 months earlier. She knew what losing meant. He changed the display again, showing the bridge. Captain June gave orders with perfect calm. His voice never wavered. "But I delivered a damage report to the bridge at 0830 and I saw him." His hands were trembling. He kept them hidden under his console where the crew couldn't see. He was as scared as the rest of us. He just refused to let it control him. Taewon spoke up, but the recording showed everyone working perfectly, coordinated. "Training," Jiho said simply. "We drilled for exactly this scenario hundreds of times. When you train enough, your body remembers what to do even when your mind is screaming in panic. We were terrified, but we were also prepared." He manipulated the console again and the hologram showed the engineering section. "This is where I spent most of the battle. 27 people worked this section. By the end, 6 of us were still alive." The schematic highlighted specific compartments. At 0900, we lost containment in Reactor 3. Standard procedure is to seal the section and vent it, but 3 engineers were still inside, trying to prevent a cascade failure. Their names were Yuna, Dohyun, and Junho. We could hear them on the intercom. Jiho's voice cracked slightly. Yuna called out to her family, said she loved them and she was sorry. Dohyun tried to fix the problem right up until the end, reporting technical details like he was filling out a routine report. Hunyo just screamed. We heard all of it. Then we vented the section. The room was deathly quiet. The coolant leak happened at 10:30. By that point, the ship was falling apart. We'd lost half our weapons, Most of our armor and life support was running on emergency power. The chief engineer, Commander Hajun, assessed the situation and determined we had maybe 20 minutes before the reactor would cascade. Jiho touched the scars on his arms. He asked for volunteers to reach the manual override. I was the only one small enough to fit through the access tunnel. He told me no, said I was too young, that he wouldn't send a child. I went anyway. Crawled through the tunnel while he shouted at me over the comm to come back. The tunnel was hot. The walls burned my hands even through my gloves. I could hear the coolant hissing, smell the radiation. My dosimeter was screaming, but I reached the valve and I sealed it. Bought us those extra 18 minutes? He paused, swallowing hard. Commander Hajun pulled me out. My arms were badly burned and I'd absorbed enough radiation to be dangerous. He carried me to the medical bay himself. Then he went back to engineering and died. When that section was hit 30 seconds later, he saved my life, then returned to his post and died doing his job. Hyejin's antennae were drooping, a sign of sadness in her species. How did you survive? The medical bay was near the escape pod corridor. When the captain gave the evacuation order, the ship's doctor threw me and 2 other wounded crew members into a pod and launched it. I was unconscious from the pain medication. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital ship and everyone I knew was gone. Jiho changed the display one final time, showing the Indomitable in its final moments. The captain's decision to ram wasn't strategic genius. It was acceptance. He knew the ship was dead. He knew most of the crew was dead. He had maybe 60 seconds before catastrophic failure, so he aimed us at the biggest target and gave everyone who could move a chance to reach the pods. 37 people made it to pods. 23 of those pods were damaged and didn't survive. 14 pods made it intact through the explosion. 17 survivors total. 3 of us were in the same pod. The hologram showed the explosion again, but this time Jiho narrated what wasn't visible. Pod 12 contained 5 people. The explosion's shockwave ruptured their air supply. They suffocated before rescue arrived. Pod 7's beacon failed. They drifted for 2 days before a search ship found them. Everyone inside had died from their injuries. Pod 3. My pod had me, a medical officer named Sunwoo, and a junior communications specialist named Yunji. Sunwoo died from internal bleeding 6 hours after launch. Yunji and I survived. We floated in that pod for 16 hours with Sunwoo's body wrapped in a thermal blanket, waiting for rescue. Jiho looked around the room at the assembled cadets. That's the truth behind the legend. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't clean. People died scared and in pain. They cried. They screamed. Some of them begged. But they also kept working. They did their jobs even when everything was falling apart. He touched the console one last time and the hologram vanished. The Devourers retreated because we broke their command structure. But it was random chance that we hit the right ship. If we'd struck any other vessel, they would have kept coming and we'd have died for nothing. We got lucky, but we also chose to fight. Captain June could have retreated. We were outgunned and outmatched. Every tactical manual says you don't engage when the odds are 15 to 1. But he decided that 2 million civilians were worth the risk. We all agreed. Even me, 13 years old and lying about my age, I agreed. Jiho's voice grew stronger. I've spent 5 years wondering if it was worth it. If 183 deaths were a fair trade for 2 million lives saved. The mathematics say yes. My nightmares say I don't know. But I keep going because Captain June ordered me to live well. Because Commander Hajun died saving me. Because Yuna and Dohyun and Junho and all the others deserve to have someone remember them as people, not just statistics. He looked directly at the class. When you become officers, you'll make impossible choices. You'll order people into danger. Some of them won't come back. That weight never gets lighter. You just learn to carry it. The lesson isn't that humans are special. It's that sometimes being stubborn and refusing to quit is enough to change everything. Instructor Velthar stood and addressed the room. The academy teaches tactics and strategy. But Cadet Jiho has taught you something more valuable. He's shown you the reality behind the theory, the cost behind the victory. I expect all of you to write a reflection on today's lesson, not about tactics, about leadership and sacrifice and what it means to serve. The cadets began to file out again, but this time several approached Jiho. They didn't ask for his story or treat him like a hero. They simply thanked him for his honesty, for showing them the truth. Word spread through the academy faster than light speed. By evening, everyone knew about the human cadet who had survived Crimson Nebula. Jiho felt the change immediately. Cadets stared at him in the corridors. Conversation stopped when he entered a room. Some looked at him with awe, others with curiosity, a few with something like fear. He hated all of it. Taewon found him that night on their barracks observation deck, staring out at the stars through the transparent aluminum viewport. The amphibious cadet approached quietly and stood beside his friend. "You should have told me," Taewon said. "I know. I've been talking about human tactics and human courage like I understood it. But I didn't. I don't think I can." "Not really." Taewon's skin shifted colors, showing his emotional distress. "You've seen things I can't imagine." Jiho shook his head. "That's not true. Your people fought the Devourers too, lost entire colonies. You understand loss? My colony was evacuated. We escaped before the attack." Taewon looked down at his webbed hands. "I've never been in real combat. I've only run simulations. Safe, comfortable simulations where if you die, you just reset and try again." "Then you're lucky," Jiho said quietly. "Keep it that way as long as you can." They stood in silence for a while, watching a distant nebula glow against the black. Not the Crimson Nebula. A different one, blue and peaceful. "Do you regret it?" Taewon finally asked. "Surviving when the others didn't?" Jiho was quiet for a long moment. "Every day, but my therapist says that's normal. Survivor's guilt? She says it means I cared about them, which is healthy. Doesn't make it easier, though. The captain's message, the one about living well. Do you think you're doing that?" "I'm trying." Jiho turned away from the viewport. "Some days are better than others." The next morning, Instructor Velthar summoned Jiho to his office. The room was sparse, decorated only with a few commendations and a holophoto of what looked like family. The Kryn gestured to a chair. "I've submitted your testimony to the Naval Archives," Velthar said. "With your permission, they'd like to include it in the official historical record." Jiho sat down slowly. "Will they make it public?" "Only to military historians and academy instructors. It won't be released to general media without your explicit consent." The instructor studied him carefully. "However, the other 16 survivors have been contacted. Several have expressed interest in contributing their own testimonies now that you've broken the silence." "I didn't mean to break our promise." "You didn't break it. You evolved it." Velthar leaned back in his chair. "You said you made a pact to honor the dead by living well. But perhaps the best way to honor them is to ensure their sacrifice teaches future generations, not as propaganda. As truth." Jiho considered this. "What do the others think?" "Eunji, the communications specialist from your pod, sent a message. She said it's time. That 5 years of silence was enough." Velthar pulled up a text file on his display. "She wants to speak with you. I can facilitate contact if you wish. I haven't talked to her since the memorial service. Perhaps you should." That afternoon, Jiho sat in a private communications booth, waiting for the connection to establish. When the screen activated, a young woman appeared. She was older than him by 3 years, but looked tired beyond her age. Yoonji's smile was genuine, though. "Jiho, you look good." "You too, Yoonji. I heard what you did. Told a whole class of cadets the truth." She laughed softly. "I think Captain Jun would be proud. I wasn't trying to break our promise, I know. But maybe it was the right thing to do anyway." Yoonji's expression grew serious. "I've been talking to some of the others. Minseok, Bora, Jiwon. We've all been carrying this alone, trying to live normal lives and pretend we're not damaged. But maybe we don't have to pretend anymore." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that what we survived matters. Not just as a military victory, but as a lesson about what people can endure, about sacrifice and duty and all those things that sound hollow until you've actually lived them." She leaned closer to the camera. "The Academy wants to use our stories to teach cadets. Real stories, not sanitized versions. I think we should let them." Jiho thought about the looks on his classmates' faces when he'd explained the truth, the understanding that had replaced their naive romanticism. It won't be comfortable. Nothing worth doing is. Yoonji smiled again. "Think about it. Talk to the others if you want. But I wanted you to know that I support what you did. So do most of the 17. After the call ended, Jiho sat in the booth for a long time, thinking. 3 days later, Hyejin approached him in the cafeteria. She carried her tray to his table without asking and sat down across from him. "Cadet," she said formally. "Hyejin. I owe you an apology. A real one, not just the one I gave in class." Her antennae drooped in a gesture of submission. "I've been reviewing my tactical assessments. Every conclusion I drew about human capabilities was based on incomplete data and cultural bias. I was wrong about your species and about warfare in general. Jiho pushed his food around his plate. You weren't entirely wrong. We do take risks that most species consider insane. But you do it from rational calculation, not recklessness. You assess the cost and decide the goal is worth it. Hyejin's compound eyes reflected the cafeteria lights. My species values individual survival above collective goals. It's why we've never produced military commanders of real distinction. We're too cautious. Caution keeps people alive. Sometimes. But sometimes boldness is necessary. She paused. I've requested to join your study group. If you'll have me. Jiho looked up, surprised. Why? Because I want to understand how humans think. How you balance fear and duty. I can't learn that from tactical manuals. She managed something like a smile with her mandibles. And because you're the best engineering student in our year and I need help with propulsion systems. He laughed. The first genuine laugh in days. Okay, study group meets Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I'll be there. 2 weeks passed. Jiho fell into a new routine, one where people knew his history but treated him normally. The stares faded. The whispers stopped. He was just a cadet again, studying hard and preparing for finals. Then the summons came from the commandant's office. Admiral Kwan was human, gray-haired and stern, with enough medals to fill a display case. She gestured for Jiho to sit, then studied him in silence for a moment. The Naval Construction Authority is commissioning a new frigate, she said without preamble. The Indomitable II. It will be the first ship of a new class, incorporating lessons learned from the original's final battle. Jiho's heart hammered in his chest. They're offering you a position on the commissioning crew. Junior engineering officer. You'd graduate from the academy 6 months early with full honors and report to the shipyard immediately. Sir, I'm not sure I'm ready. I've reviewed your records, your instructor's evaluations, your psychological assessments. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. You're ready, cadet. The question is whether you want it. Jiho thought about Captain June's last message. About living well. About the weight of survival and the burden of memory. If I accept, he said slowly, I'll be publicly tied to the Indomitable forever. Every news story, every memorial, every anniversary, I'll never be able to move past it. No, Admiral Kwan agreed. You won't, but you'll honor those who died in a meaningful way. You'll ensure their sacrifice continues to matter. May I have time to think about it? 24 hours. Jiho spent the evening on the observation deck again. This time, several other cadets were there too. Taewon, of course, Hyejin, a few others from their study group. They didn't talk about the decision. They just sat together watching the stars. Whatever you choose, Taewon said eventually. We support you. Actually, Hyejin added, if you accept the posting, I've requested a transfer to the Indomitable II as well. They need a tactical officer. Jiho stared at her. Why would you do that? Because I want to serve with someone who understands what service really means. She tapped her datapad. Also, 3 others from our class have put in transfer requests. If they're approved, you'll have a partial crew of people you've already trained with. You're all crazy, Jiho said, but there was warmth in his voice. We learned from the best, Taewon replied with a grin. The next day, Jiho stood before Admiral Kwan again. I accept the posting, sir. On one condition, the Admiral raised an eyebrow. Cadets don't usually make conditions with admirals. I want to be involved in the memorial design for the ship. The 183 names need to be displayed properly. With respect, Admiral Kwan smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. Already planned, Cadet. You'll work directly with the designers. Anything else? No, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. Don't thank me yet. You'll work harder on that ship than you've ever worked in your life. We're setting a new standard for frigate performance. She stood and extended her hand. Welcome to the fleet, Officer Jiho. He shook her hand, feeling the weight of the decision settle onto his shoulders. It didn't feel light, but it felt right. 3 months later, Jiho stood in the construction dock, looking up at the Indomitable II. The ship was still incomplete, its hull open in places, cables and scaffolding surrounding it like a metal cocoon, but the name was already painted on the bow, bold and clear. Behind him, Hyejin checked something on her datapad. Taewon stood beside her,